Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Ottawa is putting more restrictions on international students and temporary foreign workers. That includes limiting the number of international students by another 10%. What impact will that have on BC? What about on international students, on schools, on employers, and on housing? Plus, will Instagram's new teen account make things safer for young people online? As a parent, do new measures reassure you? That's in half an hour. I'm Michelle Elliott. Welcome to BC Today. Immigration Minister Mark Miller has announced further limits to come for the number of international students coming into Canada. Here he is speaking yesterday on CBC's Power and Politics.
There's room for improvement in the way they go out and recruit people, recruit international students. It's not cheap to live in Canada. We have one of the best education systems in the world. I think we need an international visa system that reflects that. It hasn't necessarily up to now. So in trimming down that volume, we're also putting a lot of qualitative measures, but just to make sure we can actually be proud as a country of this international student visa program, which does aim to get some of the best and brightest into Canada. That hasn't been the case. And the institutions that vary in quality, from some of the best in Canada, the McGills, the U of T's, the UBCs, to some of the absolute worst. Hopefully those worst will go out of business, but some of the best need to adjust as well. So no one's innocent in this. I think there's room for improvement, and I'm really hoping and looking forward to working with them to properly address some of these people that are in Canada, precarious positions.
So the Liberal government says the new target for 2025 and the year after will be 437,000 international student permits. And Immigration Minister Miller said yesterday that he expects those changes to yield about 300,000 fewer study permits over the next 3 years. And when it comes to temporary foreign workers, Ottawa is placing new limits on work permits for spouses of both foreign workers and students in master's degree programs. And as you know, earlier this year, the government announced a temporary cap to reduce the number of new student visas by more than a third this year. So this further limits the number of international students. So we're asking you, how will these limits impact BC? How will they impact students, schools? What about employers and housing in BC? You can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. You can also email bctoday@cbc.ca. In a moment, we'll be joined by a political scientist to talk more about this. Right now, I'm joined by Jessie Nikoy. She's a chairperson of the BC Federation of Students. Jessie, thanks very much for being here.
Hi, thank you for having me.
What's your initial reaction to these limits and now more limits of another 10% to international students in Canada?
Yeah, so earlier this year, we know there was a 30% decrease that was announced in the study permits and that cap that was put in place earlier. And this is an additional cap that has been put in place. Our primary concern with this was the sustainability of the post-secondary education system that we currently have. Right now, BC specifically is in a system where we're heavily reliant on international student numbers and their tuition to fund institutions. And right now, our biggest concern is that these institutions are going to be facing a lot of issues when it comes to their budgets and also with the student experience as a whole. And institutions are currently still figuring out their enrollment numbers, but we're keeping an eye on everything to make sure that students are at the forefront of all of these issues and hearing their issues and advocating for them.
Have you seen any impact yet so far to the initial limits on international students and what that has meant for funding for schools?
Well, currently we're still waiting on the numbers from the institutions that we know or our members are part of in BC, but there's definitely been concerns across the board. We've seen a lot of institutions that have already started facing budget cuts, and this was already happening in the last few years. We currently have a system that is very volatile when it comes to international students. And an example was during COVID. We have a research document that we came out with in September of 2023 that kind of highlighted the impacts of what could happen to an education system that's heavily reliant on international students. And the case is this is what has been happening in the last few years, and this is what we're seeing in BC. And now today, where we have a system that is capping the numbers, there's definitely going to be impacts. And we've been sounding this alarm for years.
Right, and that's the point that the immigration minister has been making, that these schools, these post-secondary institutions, the big institutions have perhaps been relying on international students too heavily. And so what do you make of that criticism, and what do universities and public institutions and the governments as well, provincial government, when it comes to those institutions, what do they need to do then?
Yeah, I think this is an issue that is caused of because of the heavy underfunding we have in the system. So in the early 2000s, BC public institutions were funded by the government around 70 to 80%, and we have the research on this. And right now, the system sits at an average of about 44% coming from the provincial government. So the underfunding that is happening in the system is what is causing institutions to start relying heavily on international student numbers and their tuition to make up for the shortfalls that they're seeing. And what we want to see is the provincial government taking the step in actually providing the funding. And the federal government also needs to work with the provincial government to make sure that the system is properly funded now that these caps and these restrictions are being put in place.
I want to ask you about the backlash that some international students are facing. We have heard from especially South Asian newcomers who say that online hate is really taking a toll. There's been a steady increase of racism against international students of South Asian descent. How concerning is that?
It is a big concern. I know there's a lot of people or people actually use international students as the scapegoats for the issues that we're facing. But the affordability crisis and the housing crisis that we currently have is something that has been happening for years. A reduction in their numbers does not mean there's going to be an increase in housing available. We're lacking the basic system that needs to work. But that's what's perpetuating this racism. And it's sad to see that international students are facing these issues, but we're hoping that the steps are being taken to make sure that they're provided for. And that's what the province and the federal government need to work towards, to make sure that students are not feeling this way. Because the more that happens, the less Canada becomes desirable, because the more we speak up, the less the less people are going to want to come here.
Oh, so how do you have that conversation then around, concerns around the impact of international students and recruitment without and avoiding scapegoating and stigma? It's a very complicated and complex question.
It is a complex question. It's a complex situation. What we want to see is institutions also taking that step to make sure that they're educating people, and the steps they need to take to make sure that they're providing people with the information they need before they come here. For our organization, we are making sure that we're advocating for that system to be properly funded. And that's the one thing we want to see, a system that does not need to rely on external factors that are very volatile, which is the system we have right now, to be able to fund or keep the lights on. The province needs to take the step in providing the funding that institutions need so that they don't have to rely on international students for this. Because once a system is volatile, there's going to be a lot of places that people are going to find blame for issues that are happening. And we're seeing that now, and we don't want to see that continue.
Jessie Nicoy, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much.
That's Jessie Nicoy, chairperson of the BC Federation of Students. We are taking your calls as the federal government moves to impose further limits on international students by another 10% and more restrictions on temporary foreign workers. What do you think will be the impact on BC? What about on schools, as you've just heard, on students, and on employers and on housing as well? Because some of these measures are in response to warnings that population growth is putting pressure on an already strained housing market. So we'd like to hear from you. Our numbers are 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. Joining me now for more on this is Heish Telford, Associate Professor of Political Science at the University of the Fraser Valley. Hi, Heish. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good afternoon, Michelle. Good to be with you.
What do you make of these new restrictions and limits that the federal government is announcing?
Yes, well, the federal government has finally caught up to the fact that we've got a problem here. For a number of years, provinces are responsible for universities. Universities were accepting more foreign students, and the federal government was just rubber stamping these visas and not really taking note of how many people were coming in and where they might be living. And now, as Jesse was saying, given the prices of and the lack of accommodation and the prices of rents, that we have to cut back. And so they're reducing the caps, but they've also taken other measures which are perhaps even more important in reducing the number of international students coming. They reduced the cap earlier this year, but early reports are telling us that the numbers are actually going to be lower than the cap that was set because the federal government has also increased the financial requirements for foreign students to come here quite considerably. Previously, they had to show that they had $10,000 in their bank plus enough for tuition and travel. They've raised that to almost $21,000 plus tuition and travel for the first year. That alone will eliminate a lot of students from foreign students from coming to Canada. So we've seen a cutback. But then, of course, as Jesse was saying, this is going to starve universities of much needed tuition and revenue. Jesse was absolutely right that government grants to universities have decreased from almost 80% down to almost 40%. The other factor, though, that she did not mention is that governments and provincial governments have capped, or in the case of Ontario, frozen domestic tuition. And therefore, the only source of revenue increase for universities was international students. If they come in fewer numbers, universities are going to be in a real dire situation.
And domestic students may face an increase in tuition then. Is that what you're saying?
Well, if the government doesn't re-increase the grants that they provide to university, then the only other source of significant revenue is to increase domestic tuition.
Hamish Chelford is with me, Associate Professor of Political Science at the University of the Fraser Valley. We're talking about further limits of another 10% to the number of international students coming next year and the year after to Canada, just announced by the Immigration Minister, Mark Miller, yesterday. And as well, more restrictions on spouses of both temporary foreign workers and international students. They will be limiting work permit eligibility to spouses of foreign workers in management or professional occupations or sectors with labor shortage. So those are more rules being brought in. Asking you, what impact do you think that will have on BC? What impact will it have on students, on schools, on employers, and on the issue of housing as well? 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. And Eric is calling us now from Vancouver. Hi, Eric. Welcome.
Hi. Thank you for having me.
Sure thing. What are your thoughts?
Well, I got three things I'd like to get out there really quick. First and foremost, I think calling international students is a little bit disingenuous. As somebody who's tried to employ a number of people into janitorial and childcare companies over the last year, the vast majority of applicants were quote-unquote students who are ready to work 20 to 40 hours a week for really competitive wages, also willing to work under the table. These aren't students. These are economic migrants who are here on a student visa, and I think that needs to be a part of the conversation. While I'm sure there's many legitimate students coming to Canada to study, the vast majority of those who have come in the last 2 years are economic migrants, in my opinion.
Okay, planning to pursue a work permit or looking to become permanent residents. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. And working, 20 to 40 hours a week, which is full-time, while being a student, which is impossible if you're actually a student in a real academic program.
Okay. And so what do you make of these limits that are being brought in?
Well, they're far too small. The federal government has increased the number of foreign workers and students come to Canada. I'm not sure the exact numbers, but it's been very dramatic over the last 2 years. And a 10% scale back is really just Justin Trudeau's Liberals paying lip service to the criticism they received without actually meaningfully reversing their damaging federal policies.
There were, in 2024, the target was 485,000 new study permits issued. And so there would be a decrease. And next year, they would be looking at 437,000. Okay. And so what impact do you think it'll have on BC then, do you think? I know you said it's not enough, but what might be the impact on BC?
yeah, those numbers, from 440 to 437,000, those are meaningless numbers, right? It needs to be cut back by like hundreds of thousands to actually take the pressure off of housing and off the labor market. The effect it's having right now is massive wage suppression among particularly entry-level jobs and labor jobs. And we're seeing that, Canada has the lowest wage growth of any developed country over the last 2 years because this is functionally a wage suppression measure. And of course, it also contributes to the housing crisis. It also contributes to increasing crime rates. Maybe not yet, but certainly there's going to be a knock-on effect. It's been seen in other areas.
How would there be a knock-on effect on crime rates?
Well, when you import a bunch of people who are really desperate and are here for financial reasons, and when their financial expectations aren't met, they will resort to other sources of income. Also, remember, a lot of people who are coming across aren't really here to pursue an academic career. There are going to be criminal elements from countries like India, which have a large proportion of the current
Okay, I don't know what stats we have to prove that, though, but I appreciate your point about what you're seeing is the impact on wage suppression on wages.
If you look at what's happening in Europe, you'll see that there's a huge contribution to criminality among the economic migrants that have moved into Europe. So we do actually have case studies, not in Canada, but in other countries with similar levels of development, with immigration from developing countries.
Okay.
And there's no reason to expect Canada is unique or different.
Eric, thank you so much for the call. That's Eric calling us now from Vancouver. Hamish Telford, what do we know? What do we know when it comes to, he's extrapolating there from other countries, but when it comes to impact on wages, we know that the federal government has put a cap as well on what they call low-wage workers. This is just a few weeks ago, low-wage temporary foreign workers. But what do we know is the impact? What do we actually know is the impact on housing? What do we actually know? Is there any impact on crime, as he said there?
Yes, he's absolutely right that there is this does contribute to wage suppression quite considerably. It gives employers a big supply of willing workers, workers who are willing to work long hours at low wages. I've seen no evidence that international students or temporary foreign workers are contributing to crime rates here. I'll have to speak to my colleagues in the criminology department to verify that, but I've seen no reports of that sort here in Canada. Housing, though, is another matter. There is a desperate shortage of housing, appropriate housing for all of the students who have come in and around colleges and universities around the country. Universities are now desperately trying to ramp up student residences, but of course it takes years to build residences, and they can't build enough to accommodate all of the students who have been coming. So those students then look for the available places in the community, and they are very often crowded into dank basement suites and so on and so forth, and driving up rents.
Okay, let's take another call here. David in Vancouver. Hi, David. Thanks for calling in.
Hi there. How are you doing today?
I am very well. And what are your thoughts on students? I understand you used to be an instructor at Kwantlen.
I'm a recently retired instructor, and my field of expertise is human resources management, which is what I taught, and I still consult part-time in that field. And I think you've got to separate the temporary foreign worker issue from the student visa issue. There's no question the history of this country is that we have had wave after wave of immigration to do the jobs that people who've been here for decades or generations didn't want to do. And that is the history of Canada. I mean, Pierre Burton documented that very, very well. But as far as the institutions themselves go, because as your previous caller introduced or spoke to, underfunding from the government meant that the institutions went out and sought other forms of funding. Mm-hmm. And so years and years ago, when I worked in administration at BCIT, the student tuition constituted, between 30 and 40% of total revenues. Well, that is no longer the truth in any of our public institutions. And so what we did was not the kind of international education that educators thought of, because traditionally we thought of international education as having a small number of international students from all over the world, from all parts of the world, in each class. So let's say everything I've read said up to a maximum of 1/3 of the students in a class would be drawn from all over the world. But that is not what has happened, certainly here in British Columbia. We've drawn predominantly from two big pools, China and India, and we have gone way beyond a third. I taught classes where there were only 2 domestic students in them. Everybody else was a very recently arrived student. And
what's the impact of that?
The effect of that, I thought, was very ridiculous. A lot of them were not prepared for education in the Western model, where we have discussions and we question each other. They come from a model of rote learning. They just want to be told what they need to know.
Okay.
And that's culturally very difficult for them.
But isn't the idea to be exposed to other kinds of education?
It is good, but how does that work when, in fact, everybody else in the class came from where you came from and are not Canadian students? You're not getting exposed to the Canadian educational system by being surrounded by Canadian students.
Okay. David, thank you very much. I'm going to move on to Patricia in Victoria. Hi, Patricia. Go ahead, please.
Hello. Thanks very much. I must say I agree with much of what David had to say. I am also retired from the public post-secondary education system in BC. And I think one of the important aspects of this discussion is the private post-secondary versus the public post-secondary.
Okay.
And a couple of your callers so far have spoken of public without focusing on private. And a lot of the problems with the huge numbers of people that have affected housing are on the private post-secondary side.
Which have they have increased in number over the last few years as well.
Incredible increases in the numbers, and some of them are not delivering a quality education or experience.
Okay.
And so that in itself is affecting the reputation of Canada. But I want to speak about the public because I'm especially concerned about program viability. For example, the small colleges in BC, let's say Selkirk College, North Island College, and the others of those sizes might have a fabulous program. As an example, maybe resource management. And in order for the program to run to meet its share of the expenses that are unfunded by government, they might need 16 students, but they only have 10 Canadian applicants. They've been able to fill the extra seats in those small programs and continue to run them through times of decreasing enrollment, or maybe another college opens up the same program and then you're going after the same BC students, but you can top them up with the international students. Just using a sledgehammer approach like the federal government has done really affects the viability of the college.
Of the long-term public programs. Patricia, thank you very much. I just have about a minute and a half left here with Hamish Telford. What do you make of the conversation around this and kind of how people are seeing where the solutions might be?
It's a really tricky matter to deal with because there are economic implications, and the big implications for colleges and universities is their long-term financing. If we cut back the number of foreign students to the levels that your first caller suggested, cutting them from 450,000 by half, we would have colleges and universities in huge financial problems. We had a public university in Ontario, Laurentian University, go bankrupt. Had to file for bankruptcy. Queen's University, one of the most prestigious universities in the country, is in dire economic straits at the moment. So the federal government is decreasing the foreign students slowly so as to hopefully prevent these dire economic situations affecting our universities, and hopefully moderating the housing market and the labor market at the same time.
It is, as I mentioned earlier, a complex issue, and lots of different perspectives on this for sure. Hamish, thank you so much for weaving them together for us and putting them into context.
You're welcome, Michelle.
Hamish Telford is Associate Professor of Political Science at the University of the Fraser Valley. It's 12:30 now, time for a CBC News update. And coming up, we're going to talk about the new Instagram teen accounts. And we'll ask you if that gives you reassurance that perhaps your teen is going to be safer online. You can give us a call coming up after the CBC News update. And here now is Rob Zimmerman.
Good afternoon. The provincial government says more than 2,000 homes will be built at the Heatherlands here in Vancouver and can be bought by first-time homebuyers at 40% below market value. The province worked in partnership with the Musqueam, Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh nations on the initiative. 2,600 homes will be built at the site, which was the former home of RCMP headquarters along 33rd Avenue. The Tribal Council, representing 14 First Nations on Vancouver Island, has declared a state of emergency over the opioid crisis and mental health in its communities. Data from the First Nations Health Authority shows First Nations people died from drug poisonings at a rate about 6 times higher than other BC residents last year. And police in Kamloops believe a fire that destroyed the city's historic Red Bridge this morning was deliberately set. Emergency crews were alerted shortly after 3 o'clock this morning. Within 10 minutes, much of the main span collapsed into the South Thompson River. Another small fire Tuesday forced the closure of the same crossing for more than a day. And now the forecast on the north coast. A chance of showers this afternoon with a high of 14. Highs up to 16 with a mix of sun and cloud in the Peace. In the central interior, including Prince George, a high of 15 with some sunshine and a chance of thunderstorms. Highs up to 23 with sunshine in the Kootenays. In the southern interior, including Kelowna, a mix of sun and cloud with a high of 23 as well. And for Metro Vancouver, Greater Victoria, and the Fraser Valley, some sun and cloud this afternoon with highs around 18. That's your CBC News update from Vancouver.
Thank you very much, Rob.
You're welcome.
That's Rob Zimmerman in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. This is BC Today. I'm Michelle Elliott. Thank you so much for joining us. Some emails for you now. Yesterday, we talked about BC seeking more clean energy projects to meet growing demand, and this is as the Site C Dam is set to open in December. Well, yesterday, we asked you, where should BC turn for sustainable energy? We got a lot of emails. Emily writes, I'm wondering why there isn't an emphasis on using less energy. With the statistics already indicating that we will not meet the growing demands with Site C, why are we chasing more projects without changing our consumption habits? North Americans are incredibly wasteful of all resources, and we are digging ourselves a deep hole trying to maintain our excessive lifestyles. Francie writes from Courtney, when someone talks about natural gas, please add that it is only natural in name, as fracking is the method of creating the gas product. There are so many people interested in energy generation, which is not damaging as oil and gas. Terry writes from Enderby, I know that we shouldn't be squandering our precious hydroelectric power on pumping and liquefying natural gas for a dwindling export market. And finally, this email, the solution to our lack of energy is nuclear power. It is safe. It produces way more power than wind and solar with a smaller footprint. The waste can be disposed of safely with today's technology. Chernobyl melted down because the government running the power plant was cutting corners. Fukushima melted down because of a tsunami, of which there's no risk in the BC interior. Get with the times and go nuclear. Lots of your thoughts. Thanks so much for your emails. Again, our email is bctoday@cbc.ca. Well, Instagram is going to look a bit different for younger users. The company Meta has launched Instagram teen accounts for users under 18, and they will have added restrictions aimed at increasing safety. That includes limiting who can contact them to just their followers and limiting the content they can see to exclude sensitive material. Also, time limit reminders after an hour and sleep mode. Now, this all comes amid growing pressure from governments on safety. The BC government has been pushing social media platforms to increase their safety measures for teens. Nikki Sharma is BC's Attorney General, and she spoke with CBC's Stephen Quinn this morning.
Yeah, we've been at the table with big companies like Meta, TikTok, Snapchat, and X for about a few months now to sit down with them and understand what tools they have to keep children online safe. And, we've learned a lot. And one of the things that I have to say I learned as AG is government needs to step in to set standards, because although we have these product changes from companies like Meta that are stepping in to make online platforms more safe, I really do think we need to make sure every platform operating in BC is under the same standard and having set that and have some accountability towards them. And I think that's something that's a government's job, and we're hard at work at that in BC to make sure we can keep people safe. There are certainly some improvements that Meta announced that I think are good for kids, keeping them away from self-harm, helping them protect them from exploitation and sexual exploitation online, which has been pretty tragic in BC, and we need to do more.
Oh, we're asking you, do you think these kinds of measures help protect teens? If you're a parent, do you have peace of mind that your teen is safe when online? What would help? Give us a call, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can also hit pound 690 on your phone, or you can email bctoday@cbc.ca. And joining me now is Tiana Sharma, CEO of the Online Exploitation Institute. That's a group that provides education on online safety. Hi, Tiana. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much. Always a pleasure.
Thank you for being here. I love the time reminders, because every teen listens to reminders.
Yeah, exactly.
What do you think of these new rules?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to acknowledge when platforms do take a step, but I do think that it's important for us to really praise the parents, the advocates that have fought for these platforms to be held accountable. And we're seeing, because of that pressure, that's the only reason that these platforms for businesses are, putting in more steps. I think that some of these tools that they're putting into place for teen accounts is actually going to be incredibly helpful. And at the same time, there's definitely a huge space for growth, and it does put the pressure back on the parents.
Okay, so let's go through that. In practical, tangible terms, what are the tools that you think are useful?
Well, one thing that we've been talking about for quite a long time now is we believe that influencer culture and what teens are exposed to so much these days really normalizes the commodification of themselves and people. And it really leads to sexual exploitation and the risks, the high risk behavior that we see. So knowing that not anybody can now message or contact these minors because they're going to have private accounts, that's going to be a huge step, because then you have these predatory people that are looking to predate on these, the needs that these kids have to want to be famous or make quick, easy cash. That's going to be hopefully prevented. And in addition, we're hoping that the sensitive content that Instagram is going to try and, prevent these young people from seeing is also going to be inclusive of that influencer culture or exploitative behaviors online.
And when you say it puts the onus back on parents, what kind of onus?
Well, it goes back on the parent to be able to supervise their child, right? And this is just one platform that then they have to go and supervise on. And parents have so many responsibilities in this day and age. We are bombarded with, nutrition,
right.
Positive, gentle parenting,
yes.
Making sure that they're well-rounded in sports and hobbies and all of these things, right? So the last thing I think parents need is just putting it back on them that you now have to go out of your way, despite the, full-time work that you do.
Right.
To monitor your child's activity on Instagram.
Can you tell me how that would work exactly? Because my son has an Instagram account. We are friends and follow each other, but I don't know that I can look at his account.
Yes.
Right now.
So from what they've said, you would be able to, so the parent and the teen account would actually be locked together. You'd have to send permission to have connection to each other's accounts. And then you would be able to see who your child is accepting as a friend or follower. And supposedly you'll be able to see some activities that are going on as well. Again, it's not perfect.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I mean, it'd be great if you could just talk about it too, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Which is what I hopefully do. We're going to put out the numbers again. Let us know if you're a parent, do you have peace of mind that your child is safe when online and interacting online? And what are some things that you would like to see? What do you make of this? An Instagram teen account that can be linked to a parent's account. Some of the limits include restricting those who can send a private message to your teen to just people they know, people they've already been in contact with, their followers, and also limiting the kind of content they can see. So restricting away or excluding sensitive material. What do you think of that? And this is just Instagram. So there's also TikTok and Snapchat. What would you like to see from them? You can call us 1-800-825-5950. 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. And if you're not a parent, if you're someone who works, has a loved one who's a teen, we'd like to hear from you. If you're a teen who's home today, you can call us too. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. And my guest is Tiana Sharma, who's CEO of the Online Exploitation Institute. So as I mentioned, this is one social media platform. What about the others?
And that's the problem, right? So again, they're putting the onus back on the parents, but then what's going to happen is that every parent then needs to monitor how many platforms that their kids are on, number one, right? Instead of these platforms taking accountability to make sure that their platforms are safe, right? And really putting certain things in place. Hopefully we start to see, Snapchat is one of the top apps where we see online sexual exploitation and sextortion happen. So,
I can't imagine. I don't know a parent who knows Snapchat well. Like that.
Yeah, no, I don't even. Yeah. I mean, I don't even use it, right?
Yeah.
So, and I think that even with Instagram, for example, Meta putting in these protocols, there's still vanish mode for messages, right? Mm-hmm. So that in itself actually creates a huge vulnerability for our young people because they believe that what they're posting is temporary.
Right.
And it really inhibits this understanding that there can be permanent or long-term consequences. And then also, great, you can, approve before somebody messages you, but we're putting it in their hands to approve, right?
Okay, someone can still do so if they're approved.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, let's take a call here asking you if you have peace of mind around your teen's use of social media platforms. What do you think would help? What do you do to ensure that they are safe? How do you handle social media in your house? 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone, talking about the new Instagram teen account. And Nick is calling us from Vernon. Hi, Nick.
Hey, how's it going?
I am well, and tell us about your own family.
So we have a 12-year-old daughter, so not quite a teen. And during the pandemic and all that, like being online with friends was kind of one of the only ways she could hang out for a while. So friends from school, instead of hanging out every day around the neighborhood or at school, we're online together. So they're meeting up in games like Roblox or, some of the popular ones. Animal Jam is one of them. And basically what we've set up is we use Messenger Kids. So through my wife's account, I think how it works is first we need to be friends with the parents, and then both parents allow the kids to link up on this Messenger.
Nice.
So now they're on these big games, and they can meet up in like Roblox or Animal Jam, and they can speak with each other with audio. So it's like a phone call where we're not being billed, and they can only speak to each other, really, like, because sometimes it's confusing, like, who else is on these games? How old are these other people?
Yeah.
We've heard some kind of sketchy stuff about, weird behavior from people kind of trying to interact with children on there. So that sort of just gave us peace of mind where they have a direct link between each other through MSN Messenger. I don't know if it's MSN Messenger Kids or if it's through Meta, like the Facebook Messenger Kids. But that's kind of like how we've sort of managed to feel good about what she's up to. The other thing we've decided is like until she's 16 or like has her own job or like driving and showing some real kind of like adult moves in life, we're going to not really allow straight up social media. So Facebook, Instagram, I just feel like it's a little too heavy duty for kids their age to kind of be out there in that way. And just kind of, it's a lot of like stressful comparing each other's lives and trying to meet up to these standards that aren't really realistic.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's really a fair sort of thing to put on a kid at that age. So once she's, got a driver's license or a job kind of thing, like a part-time job, then she can get an Instagram, and that's kind of where we're at with it.
Wow. I mean, you've put so much thought into this. I love listening to how you've approached it, Nick.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to be worrying about what she's up to or who is interacting with her.
Yeah.
But if I know that she's hanging out with her best buddies and they're running around in these fun games, that's totally cool on our end.
Yeah, I have to say that's kind of what my approach was as well. So I always knew who it actually was they were interacting with. Really fantastic. Thank you so much for calling in.
You're welcome. Take care.
Take care. That's Nick and Vernon. Is it Messenger Kids then?
I'm not sure.
That's really cool. Okay, so it's basically being able to connect first with the parents and ensuring that it is their kids who are interacting with you. But I had, my kids were also on Discord and Roblox at that age. What do you make of that? Is it possible now? I know sometimes we say it's better to let them actually experiment with social media, but is it possible to say, I take his point that it's a lot to put on a teen, to take in all of that, that information and content that does force you to compare yourself. So what's your stance on that?
I think that our caller was really balanced in his approach. And I would say that the more you can delay, the better. It's sometimes not as realistic. And I think that there needs to be a two-parted approach where on one hand, it is your job as the parent to make sure that you're limiting their exposure, because minors are minors for a reason. We have our laws in place for a reason. Their brains are not fully developed. And then on the other hand, we have to make sure that we have conversations with them, and we have an internet agreement or, whatever it is, where you're having this conversation so that you feel safe with them taking safe risks online, right? We can't just say, they'll learn
Right.
when it comes to the harms that can happen digitally, which are actually quite intense and can be quite severe.
Absolutely. And we've had some tragic cases here in BC. And what he said too about perhaps tying it to the maturity level, to his daughter's maturity level. And, and if you can handle something like driving or handle, other responsibilities, then you have the maturity to handle social media. I really like that. Let's take another call. Shannon in Souk. Hi, Shannon.
Hi.
Hi, go ahead. What do you think? How do you feel as a parent?
Well, I have to say, I don't feel very comfortable about the idea at all. And I know the person I spoke to before said, "Oh, no one said that yet." I feel terrified. Always do.
I think a lot of people do. I don't know. I don't think you're alone.
I'm just saying it. And I found the easiest thing for me to cope with it is trying to teach my child and her friends in an open dialogue that it's okay to not know, and it's okay to feel comfortable and to walk away on her own account, but also if someone else on their account is showing her something. I think that's my big fear, is that no matter how much I can restrict her account, there's still the other friend who has full access, or the other friend who has things that I can't absolutely control. So it's teaching her that you might still come across things that aren't okay, and learning how to safely and responsibly be able to say, I'm at a safety limit for myself, and I'm going to walk away in a way that's not embarrassing.
Oh my goodness, there's so much there. That is fantastic. I love when you said it's okay for me to not know this and to not consume it. Is that what you said, Shannon?
Yeah, absolutely. I won't be able to constantly make those choices for her, so I want her to be able, and we go through scenarios sometimes, and we'll see some on my own feed that I'll get and be like, oh, that's not what I wanted to see. Go past it or choose to avoid it.
It sounds like you've talked to your daughter a lot about boundaries.
Yes, well, I have a background in trauma, so having been in those fields, learning to advocate and feel comfortable has been a really strong one for us, as well as what I noticed with some of those is talking to the kids about who's in the background of the pictures you're taking. So I've had some pretty open discussions about, does everybody else in the room know that you're taking a picture? Are there any reflective surfaces? Because if you accidentally get someone in the mirror, you've just posted something that you didn't mean to, and trying to let them know, like, mistakes are okay, but you have to come and talk to us so that we can help.
Wow. Any thoughts, Tiana, while we have Shannon on the line?
That's beautiful. You've hit the right marks. What we see being so incredibly effective is incorporating the consent and boundaries into the digital space. But I think what's so incredible about what you've been doing with the open conversation is allowing this safe space to make mistakes and to not know, and for you also being able to communicate with your child about when you've made mistakes or when you see something that you don't know, and showing, mirroring the kind of behavior that you hope that she starts to do. So that's wonderful.
And Shannon, you said, when she decides something is just, not, doesn't feel safe for her, and you said, try to and back out and leave in I think you said non-embarrassing way. Like, what are the strategies that you've gone through with her?
So for those, they tend to be finding either a different, I just, like, if what one of the things she can do is she can always, I've got an app for her where she can make her phone ring.
She can make her phone ring
as if I'm calling her, and so then she knows to kind of talk as if I'm calling her, and it excuses her out of the room if she's got her phone on her. But that only works if no one else can see her playing with her phone. The other thing is, depending on her confidence, is just having her actually practice and doing it with her friends as well when I have the opportunity, and talking to the parents that I am doing that, but saying, I think I'm going to leave for a moment, or I think I'm going to go over here for a moment. Not having to say, makes me uncomfortable, because we'd love that our kids can do that.
Sure.
I remember being a teenager and being able to walk away is hard enough, let alone what you're doing is not something I consent to.
I'm not allowed. Yeah.
Yeah. Or I just don't feel comfortable, or I'm not sure. That's a hard thing to say when you're young.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's
Way to
hard
go.
as an adult.
That's true. And I think it's so commendable that you have those boundaries, and you talk about that, how comfortable do you feel, and giving her strategies to leave and to have an out. Shannon, I know you said you started off by saying you don't have peace of mind at all, but you came out with these measures and strategies that tell us that you should have peace of mind.
Well, thank you. Yeah, no, I tell her too, I've seen things online that you can't unsee.
Yeah.
And, just keeping it realistic with them too, that if it's not me you're going to talk to another safe adult, but make sure that you have someone to talk to is a really big one for that.
Yeah, fantastic. Shannon, thank you so much for your call.
Thanks for taking me. Have a great day.
Have a great day. Wow, two inspiring parents.
That's
right
amazing.
There. And it's great to hear parents, have these strategies, but at the same time, like she said, I still don't have peace of mind that these measures are going to be enough. And so what about, as you started out saying, Tiana, Meta only came, pushed forward with this after facing so much pressure, after facing advocacy. So what needs to be done when it comes to governments, for example, because we know the BC government has been trying to put forward legislation to hold social media companies accountable. Now they're kind of working together to come up with strategies. But what are the rules? What are the standards that actually need to be enforced?
Yeah, and this is the thing, is that the second our government started to say, hey, you can get sued for not being proactive, that's when these social media companies start to say, oh, well, let's collaborate together. So I do think legislation, governments have such a huge role to play, and I'm very proud of BC for the actions and just being how proactive that they're being right now. I think that there needs to be more accountability on the platform to create a safe space in itself. So
for any age.
For any age. Because at the end of the day, it's if you're allowing predatory people and exploitation to happen on your platform, it's at some point going to reach the young people that are on there. And you have a role to play. It's your responsibility. If you're putting something out there that the population is on, it's your responsibility to look out for those people. Those are your consumers. And you want to make sure that they have healthy, safe experiences. So again, it's so difficult for young people and even adults if they have inappropriate content or something wrong happen to them on especially platforms like Meta. It is impossible to get a hold of a real person. It's very difficult to get a response right away that they're going to take that content down or take, proactive measures. So
you're dealing with a faceless
yes.
company.
Yeah.
Right. And you have to kind of really feel for people who, as much as we can try to stay on top of things and come up with these solutions, you feel for people who just have not had the tools, have been targeted through no fault of their own. And so now we have this tool or this new teen account. What would be your advice for people then as these tools are put in place? How can we use them to our benefit?
Yeah, the first piece is it really gives that opportunity, an authentic and natural opportunity for parents to talk about the usage. Okay, so these are new things that are going to come in play. I'm happy that there's going to be a little bit of protocol put in place. Now let's talk about what that's going to look like, because we're going to share that responsibility together as parents. And Shannon spelled this out so perfectly, because this is what we do when we educate through our educational programs, is we come up with the different ways a young person can get out of a situation in ways that they feel comfortable, because saying block that person or, just stop responding, well, maybe you're not comfortable doing that.
Yeah.
So we want to give them multiple ways to do that. We want to talk to them about what is, what's an unsafe or unhealthy person or unsafe behaviors online. And I think something that we need to start talking about much more frequently now is AI. It's very easy to create a deep fake profile and say that you go to the same school and take over somebody's account and friend request. And so these conversations still need to be had. And I think that, as parents and community, we have to educate and inform ourselves on these things so we can have those conversations.
Wow. Well, I'm really glad that you were here for this conversation today. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Tiana Sharifi is CEO of the Online Exploitation Institute. Kathy wrote us, parents and family are best suited to raising healthy kids. Facebook, Instagram, governments, schools cannot be held as a primary supervisor. It's a parent's duty and responsibility to set limits. Thank you for all of your thoughts on that. BC Today at cbc.ca.